Your Excellency, the President of the Republic of Kenya, President William Samoei Ruto, President of the Republic of Uganda, President Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, other representatives of heads of state, president and government, the CEO and President of African Finance Corporation, Samaila Zubairu, Excellencies, Ministers and heads of delegations, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It is my great honor and privilege to welcome you to the Africa We Build Summit of 2026. This important summit provides a unique platform for dialogue and collaboration, which is aimed at accelerating the mobilization of capital for strategic infrastructure investments across the African continent. Ladies and gentlemen, Africa continues to face a persistent infrastructure financing gap with critical shortages in key sectors such as energy, transport, and digital connectivity. These gaps constrain economic growth, limit productivity, and slow our collective development ambitions. Kenya, like many countries across the continent, experiences similar infrastructure challenges, which remain a binding constraint to growth, even as our social sectors continue to require sustained and inclusive investment. Despite the urgent demand for infrastructure development, governments across Africa are compelled to navigate a delicate balance, operating within the realities of prevailing macroeconomic conditions and fiscal pressures. Using Kenya as an illustrative example, our fiscal position presents real constraints on policy choices. Public debt currently stands at approximately 65 to 67% of our GDP, with the debt service obligations consuming about 50% of our ordinary revenue. At the same time, our tax to GDP ratio remains in the mid-teens, reflecting both structural economic factors and the social and political limits of taxation. Compounding these challenges, global financial conditions have also tightened, making borrowing more expensive, less predictable, and increasingly restrictive for developing economies. This mismatch between infrastructure expectations and fiscal capacity underscores an urgent need for new and innovative approaches to development finance. And I would request to pause there and just mention the way we look at infrastructure in Kenya, and more particularly the corridor, is that the corridor is not a route. Corridor is not about rails. It's not about roads. Corridor is an integrated system. It is an economic ecosystem. It is about production. It is about industrialization. It is about value addition. It's about employment creation. It is about prosperity, in summary. And that is why we have a holistic approach to our development initiatives. We are looking at how to integrate various infrastructure projects, because I will tell you that corridor does not start at the ports. It doesn't start at our airports. It actually starts at the farm. It starts at the factory, and it starts at the production centers. It is how you connect production centers to markets that is what is important. That is why you must also remember, as you do the rails, as you do airways, airports, as you do trunk roads, that feeder roads are equally important. So you must have a system where feeder roads connect to trunk roads connect to meter gauge railway, because standard gauge railway should not be a replacement of meter gauge railway, but should be blending and integrating with meter gauge railway. Then meter gauge railway should lead you to a dry port, which then should connect through SGR to seaports and airports. That is when now you have a corridor that is complete, a corridor that gives value, a corridor that moves you from rhetoric to deliveries, because what we need is not political statements. It's not about rhetoric. It's about delivery. But this requires bold and sometimes uncomfortable decisions have to be made. and therefore we require bold and courageous leaders in this space. I want to just summarize it by saying that I think the problem that we have been undergoing is that we are trying to do 21st century infrastructure development by using 20th century financing models. That is why we are still thinking about the traditional ways of raising funds. I want to say that this summit could not be more timely. The Africa We Build Summit offers an opportunity to rethink the continent's development finance paradigm by aligning Africa's long-term capital with the continent's vast infrastructure needs. In Kenya, we have already embarked on this transition by shifting away from traditional debt-heavy public financing models and embracing blended investment-led approaches. A key example is the recent establishment of the National Infrastructure Fund, a fund that we have established within an initial capital or seed capital of about $3 billion US, which resources we have sourced or raised from divestiture and privatization of capital assets or public capital assets. This is a fund that is designed to mobilize capital for commercially viable public infrastructure projects. We are trying to optimize the assets that we have, and this is going to help. This infrastructure fund is going to help in project development, in project designs, in project preparation, feasibility study, economic, social, and impact assessment, procurement process, up to execution. We are also advancing other innovative financing mechanisms, including securitization, more particularly in the road sector. This is what we call an intelligent and integrated optimization of the use of our assets. And I want to put it this way, that we are looking at a country, and we are looking at a region, and we are looking at a continent that will use its assets and not rely on others to optimize the use of those assets and to use the proceeds of those assets for risk restructuring and risk reallocation or allocation. I want to also add the last, which is the revitalization of public-private partnership frameworks to attract private sector investment. As I conclude, Your Excellencies, this summit is expected to serve as a launchpad for bold and transformative decisions that will foster stronger collaboration among African governments, investors, and industrialists to mobilize the capital required to develop the infrastructure that will drive Africa's industrialization and long-term prosperity. Thank you very much, Your Excellencies, and allow me at this stage to invite the Prime Cabinet Secretary and Cabinet Secretary for Foreign Affairs, the Honorable Musalia Mudavadi, who will then invite His Excellency the President.